I wanted to start this briefing on time, but then I noticed that Robert Burns of the Associated Press wasn't here, so we held it up, allow him to take his seat in the center. We're going to start the briefing today with Timothy Connelly, who's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations. See, there's a special operation right there. And he's going to talk to you about part of our continuing effort to alert our forces in Bosnia to the dangers of mines. This is what he's going to describe is an information package that's being sent over there, which is just one more tool in a kit that they've been building really since they started training to go to Bosnia last fall. And with that, Tim Connelly.
Thank you. As Ken said, I'm with Special Operations, and in addition to our primary function, we also are responsible for the Humanitarian Demining Technologies Project, which is a project being run out of Fort Belvoir that has been working now for over a year and a half on developing better technologies for use by humanitarian deminers, as opposed necessarily to counter mine operations in a military context. And one of the things that we developed about 9 to 12 months ago was something called MineFacts, which is a CD-based information folder that contains information on over 650 landmines, both anti-tank and anti-personnel. They are landmines going back to World War II. They are every landmine that the intelligence community could identify as having ever been put in the ground anywhere in the world in any kind of conflict. And the purpose of it is to provide a compendium that humanitarian deminers could use to look through, and as they went and found mines, to help identify them. The MineFacts contains characteristics, it contains pictures, diagrams, information about country of origin, and essentially is, as I said, a compendium of things that you as a humanitarian deminer might want to have. As we began to look at the former Yugoslavia mission and the I-4 mission, as well as the humanitarian organizations that were going to be operating there, we realized that a CD, while useful in a sort of garrison or administrative environment, is not particularly useful if you're in a combat zone, or if you're in an area in which there is limited resources and limited access to the kinds of computers it takes. So what we did right before Christmas is we looked at extracting from MineFacts those mines that we had reason to believe were in Yugoslavia, in the former Yugoslavia. And I'm happy to announce today, as we have yet another contribution to the information data that they are using over in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and it is the Bosnia file. Bosnia file is 3 high-density diskettes. It is Windows-based. It is very low in memory needs, and it is designed to provide down to, in some cases, the platoon level on the I-4 side, and down to the individual headquarters and feeding stations and operational stations within the humanitarian community, down to that level to give individuals information about landmines. If I could have, I guess I'm the one doing this, which is why I have a mobile mic. Let me give you just a quick preview. All right. Okay, there we go. This is an example of one of the pages within the Bosnia file database. As you see, there are 36 mines represented in the database. Roughly 17 of them are anti-personnel, and the remainder are anti-tank. 70% of them are of former Yugoslavian manufacturer. If you'll see up in the upper left, you get a picture of the mine. You get a description of the mine, you get information on the manufacturing country, and you also get information on where within the world these mines have been found. In addition, there are additional pictures, schematics, there are pictures regarding the fusing mechanisms in some cases, and then a different profile. In addition, there are various pages that contain other general information, the shape of the mine, the height, the diameter, what the weight is, what kind of metal content. Very important. In the case of this particular mine, the PMA3, the metal content is found only in the fusing mechanism. This is an extremely difficult mine to find with conventional mine clearing technology. It requires amazing patience and concentration on the part of the operator. And it is one of those mines that we have been finding in former Yugoslavia, and one that we are concerned about. In addition, you'll get information on the components of the mine, which is of use to those who are in the engineering units. And then we go into the fusing mechanism. Again, the fusing mechanism will tell you whether there is an anti-handling device, is there an arming device. This information is of use to the EOD types. You can search any of the mines you wish. If you'd like to look at the PMA2, you simply go to and you get a picture of the PMA2, and as you see, you can walk back through the same information to the general description of the mine. We have found that this kind of an approach is one which our soldiers and the humanitarian community find very, very useful, because of the fact that it is easy to deal with. It is in a medium that is familiar to them. It allows you to print out anything you see here to include pictures of the mines and the basic data on them. And basically we feel that it contributes to both the mission of I-4 as well as the mission of the humanitarian community, in particular their efforts over the long haul to bring peace and stability to the region. I'll take any questions you may have.
How many sets of diskettes are you going to be distributing over there?
The initial run on this was 500 sets. That was the going in. We are now in the process of identifying the units that they'll go to, as well as the organizations within the humanitarian community that will be distributing them. And then we have the ability on very, very short notice to continue to produce as many as demand may drive. Sir.
Any being produced in other languages?
They are not, no.
How many mines does it cover, did you say?
It covers 36 mines, 17 of them anti-personnel and 19 of them anti-tank. As I said, roughly 70% of the mines represented are of former Yugoslavian manufacture, which makes sense given it was Yugoslavia was a country that was very heavy into mine manufacturing and export. And the remainder are essentially Eastern Bloc, former Eastern Bloc manufacture.
One of the pictures showed a hand apparently unscrewing the mine. Does this information provide details on how to disarm it?
It does not. As you may know, in both humanitarian as well as military mine clearing, this notion of diffusing the mine is something you find in Hollywood. The standard procedure for mine clearing when one identifies a mine is to clear enough of the debris away from it to put a charge against it, put the charge against it, step back and blow the mine. We do not get in the business of going in and dismantling the fusing mechanisms. The picture that you saw was designed to be able to show what the fusing mechanism looked like, because particularly in the MineFacts database, there is a menu that you can go through to help you identify the mine if all you can see in the ground is the fusing mechanism. And that's the reason for that particular shot.
Do you have a breakdown on how many mine accidents there have been involving I-4, and can you use the breakdown on troops from different nationalities?
I do not. My office would not track that. I am sure the Joint Staff or Public Affairs could probably provide that for you. Sir.
Was this something the SIGs requested you come, or one of the commands asked for, or is it something you volunteered and they thought it was a good idea?
It was something as I said, we have had a responsibility now for a couple of years on the humanitarian demining area. We designed the MineFacts database in a CD format, and then as we looked at what are we going to be able to do to contribute to the I-4 mission, we looked at providing training, which we did. We sent humanitarian demining experts to both Fort Bragg and Fort Campbell to train the engineering units there. And we also looked at how we could leverage existing technologies we had designed in our technologies, humanitarian demining technologies project. And a lot of the technology you see on the ground over in the former Yugoslavia being used by I-4 is technologies developed by our office. And thirdly, we looked at MineFacts and said, well, this is good, but we're not likely to find a CD-ROM reader. I mean, I don't have one in my office. We're not likely to find one sitting down in a platoon tactical operations center somewhere in the I-4 sector. So we went and extracted the mines out that we thought were most likely to be found. We put them in the stupidest format, meaning the dummied down most likely to be used by the most likely computer in the theater, and then we produced it, and we're going to be sending it over there. Sir.
How prevalent are computers at the platoon level? I mean, do these guys all walk around with them? Or?
Because of yes, the short answer is the computers are very prevalent. When I was in Desert Storm in a civil affairs unit up in Iraq, we had computers down to the individual support teams. Because a lot of what you do now in terms of reporting and in terms of your data collection, particularly in the civil affairs arena, which is where we think these will be most heavily used, is all done in databases and relational databases and word processing. So it's not quite everyone has a ThinkPad in their rucksack, but it is down to levels where it wasn't even down to in 91.
What sort of a machine do you need to run these?
All it requires is 4 megabytes on the hard drive and 4 megabytes of RAM. It operates in a Windows environment, but any of the Windows that have come out since Windows was launched, it will work under that format. And will also print to almost any printer that you may be able to connect to your system.
Are you releasing this here? Also these 3?
Releasing in what sense?
The 3 discs?
Yeah, actually, yes. Yes, we are. In fact, someone was supposed to come around and drop some off. If you haven't gotten any, we have some for you. And you are welcome to. The cost of the original project, which included the 500 of the CD, we, by the way, made more of the CDs. 500 of the CDs and 500 of the diskette sets was roughly $25,000. Any additional sets we get now that we've amortized the development cost will be roughly $7 a set. So $2 a disc. It's a 3-disc set. And we at this point believe that the initial 500 will satisfy all of the I-4 needs and many of the humanitarian needs. And as these are not copy protected, so we anticipate there being a natural proliferation within the region by people just making copies on their own, and we encourage that because it is our goal to get this kind of information as far down in the hands of operators, whether they be I-4 members, whether they be humanitarian organizations, whether they be economic rehabilitation people, anyone who is going to be operating this region for the next decade is going to benefit from knowing what it is out there, and this is one of the ways we can do that. Yeah.
What are the promising technologies that will be utilized to help detect mines in the future?
What are they? We have been looking at a number of areas. We look at ground-penetrating radar. We have been looking at more enhanced traditional mine detection, which is essentially a metal detecting capability. What you have to keep in mind is that the humanitarian demining requirements are different in many ways from the military demining requirements, which is one of the reasons why we got involved in helping train the I-4. And that is that a humanitarian demining has a standard that says that this field is cleared to as close to 100% as humanly possible. And you will be able to allow refugees to come in and grow their crops, or have people come in and grow their crops. A traditional military countermine or mine breaching requirement is roughly the 80% solution. I need to get my force that's behind me from here to there. There is a minefield in front of me. I am interested in pushing aside as many of those mines as I can as I move to that objective. If in the process of moving I incur casualties, those are casualties that have been factored into the cost of my mission, and while I do not like them, I accept them as part of that mission. The I-4 standard being used over in Bosnia is the humanitarian standard, for obvious reasons. The only mine clearing that American forces are involved in are those mine clearing operations that are required for them to do their tactical operation plan, which means for them to be able to put up a tent city at Tuzla Air Base, or for them to put a talk up somewhere out in their area of responsibility. That means they're going to have people walking around, not walking in discrete lanes, but basically roaming through that area. Therefore, their clearing standard is the equivalent of what it would be required in a humanitarian environment. The other point I want to make is that one of the things that, and I think one of the successes of the humanitarian demining program has been that we have been responsive to requirements by people who do this for a living, meaning those humanitarian organizations for whom humanitarian demining is a way of life. And we recognize that the key component of that is to give a country the ability to do this themselves. That means you can't give them the stealth bomber sensor suite as a solution to their mine problem. It means you have to give them a capability that you can leave behind with them, that they can maintain, that they can operate, that they can understand why it works the way it does, and that they can employ it properly long after we step back from that country and allow them to sustain their own program. So with that kind of a focus, we have been able to leverage some technologies developed in the countermine arena and make them a little better and a little different for use in host nation demining programs. And we have been successful, and I think you're seeing some of that success in Bosnia in terms of the equipment that we've managed to provide out of our humanitarian project. Yes, sir.
How confident are you in the competence of the belligerents to clear the mines?
It has been our experience that I think their competence is high. I think the situation is that we need, as we are doing, to encourage the former belligerents, as you put it, to begin to develop an organic or a national demining capability. This is a long-term problem for them. They recognize that. Their short-term interests are in other areas besides dealing with this long-term problem. What we are doing is encouraging them to establish, designate who within their government will have this as a responsibility, establish a program, and then begin to take those forces that traditionally do demining, which are engineering for the most part, and begin to train them to go through and conduct a comprehensive survey of what the problems are and then develop a program accordingly. Our experience in countries that had a significantly less trained and significantly less focused demining capability militarily has been that you can, with work and with dedication, stand up a very, very fine capability, and that is our hope, and we have every confidence that that'll be the case.
Haven't the incidents occurred in areas that were supposed to have been cleared?
Yes, they have, in some cases. And that indicates just how difficult the challenge is of finding landmines in this environment, both as a function of the metal content of those landmines, as a function of the difficulty there is in detecting them, even with the finest equipment, which is what we have provided our forces. There is always that human factor. There is always that possibility that you'll miss something. We are confident that our soldiers are doing everything they possibly can in the use of this equipment and in the techniques that they employ to clear to that 99.9% standard. We do not at this point know why in some cases there have been mine accidents, for the most part vehicular mine accidents, in areas that were alleged to have been cleared. I know that we have been looking at sending a team over to simply walk around, if you will, and go to the units we trained while they were still in the United States and see how things are going, see if there's problems perhaps that we didn't anticipate with the technology that we sent over, and just basically continue this ongoing effort to work to make this process as close to perfect as we possibly can. Sir.
Is the U.S. military satisfied that mines are no longer being produced anywhere in the former Yugoslavia?
I don't know the answer to that.
In the context of this, the killing of this Sergeant Dugan, are any of the mines over there capable of somehow bouncing out of the ground and inflicting the kind of injuries that he was killed from?
I'm not personally familiar with the characteristics of all of the mines. I do know there are mines in the world's mine inventory that have as one of its more insidious capabilities to the bounding mine, but understand that a mine is designed to wound, not kill. In fact, there are cases in which mines have been redeveloped because they killed more often than they wounded. So all of the bounding mines that I am familiar with bound to about waist level on an average height of a man, because the object is to create a catastrophic injury, where a head wound is clearly one that kills a soldier on the spot.
Information in this new file about those types of mines?
Yes, there is. I'm getting an indication that there is. Yes.
In terms of where some of this information came from, as part of the Dayton Accord, the warring parties were supposed to give you information on minefields and...
Yes.
Did any of that information spill into this?
Not in particular. Let me give you the genesis, and I should have done this at the front end. The original MineFacts database is a result of an effort by the National Ground Intelligence Center. which is located at Charlottesville, Virginia. And they had a classified database of mines. And through a very concentrated effort and an effort in aggressive declassification, if you will, they managed to take out of that database those pieces of information that the intelligence community simply could not agree could be declassified, mostly having to do with the technical specifications of the fusing mechanisms. And what was left was what, for the most part, you see in the Mine Facts CD. And then what we have done is we have further enhanced that over the last year with information that has come in as a result of the UNPROFOR's database, as a result of information that's come from engineering units that operated in the UNPROFOR, as well as the Mine Action Center that the Department of Humanitarian Affairs of the UN had established in the region prior to the Dayton Agreement. And we take that information and we compiled it and scrubbed it against what we had already in the system. And that's how we both enhanced the current version, this is a version 1.1 of the CD-ROM, and similarly we determined which of the 650 mines that are in the original CD are likely to have been to be found in Bosnia. So it's an all-source effort, primarily based upon the UNPROFOR's experience, not to any great degree based upon the warring factions' Dayton Agreement responsibilities to report mines, because as you know, the agreement says they have to report locations of mines and begin a process of removing them, which is different than sort of giving a list of what we have and where it might be. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We have copies of, I believe, the discs and also a press release which you can get from Lieutenant Colonel Wood afterwards if you're interested. Let me start with an announcement or two. Secretary Perry today announced a reduction in the reserve component force structure and several unit deactivations in the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force for the current fiscal year. This is the third in a series of 5 reductions in reserve force in order to bring the reserve forces down to size that's necessary after the Cold War. There's a rather extensive release with questions and answers and details, which, if you haven't picked up already, will be available in the back of the room as you go out. Secondly, the Defense Authorization Bill, which was signed into law on Saturday, contained a name change for the Office of the Assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Atomic Energy. It's been modernized to become the Assistant of the Office of the Assistant of the Secretary of Defense for Nuclear and Chemical and Biological Defense Programs. The change more accurately describes the current functions of the office. This is the office that's headed by Dr. Harold Smith, who's briefed down here in the past. And we can give you more details on this if you want, but it incorporates the chemical, biological, and nuclear functions that the office has already been performing under the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program and other programs. With that, I'll take your questions on other name changes. Charlie.
Dr. Perry said this morning that I-4 is going to start getting more information on these suspected war criminals in Bosnia, including photographs and other information. Could you give us more information on that, the lack of information that they might have had before, and what kind of what you expect it to be, how it's going to be done, how rapidly is it moving?
I can't answer the question on how rapidly it's moving. What Dr. Perry had in mind was basically clearer descriptions of the indicted war criminals and good pictures in cases where we have them. Most of this would be provided through the war, by the War Crimes Tribunal, handed to NATO through I-4 and down to the people in the checkpoints. I want to stress that it's not the job of the military to run a police state. and it's not their job to go out aggressively to search for war criminals, and they don't intend to do that. The issue here is what happens if they encounter a war criminal. How do they recognize the war criminal before they can detain the war criminal? They are supposed to detain war criminals if they encounter them in the normal course of their business.
The Secretary's made that clear repeatedly, including this morning. How many pictures did they have of how many of these people? I believe there were over 50 of them like that.
There are 52 indicted war criminals at this
Did they
time.
have pictures of how many of them?
I've seen a figure of 15, but that may not be the accurate figure, and I think we need better information from I-4 and the War Crimes Tribunal on that, and that should be forthcoming. But according to one report I've seen from the theater, 15 of these people have been identified to the troops and to some of the troops in pictures. Now, there's some dispute over how accurate and clear the pictures are, and one of the issues we're trying to resolve here is getting good pictures and good information about these people. Having said all that, I would not anticipate that a lot of these people are going to be traipsing through checkpoints. I think that as the focus on them becomes clearer and as the information about them becomes more widespread, that they're likely to arrange their movements in ways that don't bring them into contact with I-4 troops.
Well, Ken, on that point, do you have any evidence that Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic, indicted war criminal, actually passed through any NATO I-4 checkpoints?
No, we have no evidence that he did.
Do you have any evidence that he didn't?
Well, it's hard to, I mean, how do you have evidence that he didn't?
I just want to make sure we covered both sides of that.
This is the fairness for which CNN is well known, is to cover both sides of every issue like that. We are looking into this, and we're trying to find out exactly what happened. But I want to stress that without suggesting that he went through a checkpoint, because we honestly don't know that he went through a checkpoint, my understanding is that the report that he went through a checkpoint was based on Bosnian Serb officials. They were the people who said that he went through checkpoints. We have no evidence that he did go through checkpoints, but I want to describe what happens at these checkpoints. The checkpoints are set up primarily to enforce traffic into and through the zones of separation. And their main goal is to make sure that weapons aren't improperly being transported into the zones of separation, which are supposed to have been cleared of weapons. Those of you who have been over there, Bill Gertz and others, can appreciate the geography of these checkpoints. But so they're concentrating on military traffic. They're not concentrating on civilian traffic. Sometimes they stop civilian traffic, and they might look in cars. They might open the hoods and the trunks and under the seats and things like that. Other times they don't. It depends on the flow of the traffic. It depends on the intelligence they have for that day and what their particular mission might be that day. The reason they don't is that one of the goals of the I-4 is to provide free movement through Bosnia, and it wouldn't be compatible with that mission if they were stopping every car at every checkpoint.
Well, wasn't this the report of Karadzic going through the checkpoints the precipitating event that resulted in this better information, intention to distribute better information to the troops?
Well, I think it's broader than that. We've had in the last couple of days the Holbrook Rules of the Road Accord, and what that does is to basically lay out new rules for dealing with indicted war criminals and dealing with people suspected of being war criminals. It says you can't go out to the former belligerents. It says you can't go out willy-nilly and arrest people on your assumption that they might be war criminals. They have to be included on a list that you get from the International War Crimes Tribunal. And this Rules of the Road Accord was agreed to by the parties in light of their goal of maintaining freedom of movement in Bosnia. So In other words, there are a number of factors here. There's the fact that the 11 people were arrested by the Bosnian Muslims. The reports unconfirmed that Karadzic went through checkpoints without being detected, and the Holbrooke mission down to Bosnia and the area in general to work out new rules of the road. We're trying to get I guess, a clearer understanding among all the parties of exactly how they will deal with war criminals.
But in the past, I-4 spokesman said that one of the reasons the troops at checkpoints were not given detailed descriptions and photographs was that that was the first step on the road to actively searching for war crime suspects. Now you say there's new rules of the road. Is this a new mission for the
No,
for the NATO troops?
Holbrooke rules of the road are designed to do two things. One, basically to preserve freedom of movement throughout Bosnia, and second, in order to do that, to be very specific about the people who can be arrested. You know that there were charges by the Bosnian Serbs that the arrest of the 11 people was unfair and that they shouldn't have been arrested. So the issue here is, how do you combine the desire, the legitimate desire which the United States supports, to detain war criminals on the one hand and to preserve freedom of movement on the other? That's what the Holbrooke rules of the road are supposed to do.
But the question is this distribution of better information to the troops an expansion of their mission, and is it the first step in this dreaded mission creep that
No.
U.S. commanders are so?
No, to answer the weekly question with the weekly answer, no, it is not the first step down the road to mission creep. From the very beginning, we've said that our troops are not going there to be policemen. They're not going there to search out war criminals, and they're not. We've also said from the very beginning that if they encountered a war criminal, they would detain the war criminal, the suspected or indicted war criminal, and turn him or her over to the proper authorities. Now, so the question arises, well, how do they know who these war criminals might be? This is a way to provide them some basic information so they can find out.
Have any procedures been changed regarding checking identification papers or anything?
As far as I know, they have not.
How far down the chain of command this information and these photographs are supposed to go? Will it go down to individual soldiers at individual checkpoints?
Well, it wouldn't do much good if it just sat up at the division level, because the people who are actually, who may be in a position to encounter an indicted war criminal would be at the checkpoints. But I want to point out again, so there's no misconception about this, the main goal of the checkpoints is to control the movement of arms and military personnel in Bosnia. It's not to control civilians. Yeah, Bill.
U.S. News reported this week that intelligence documents were inadvertently posted on the internet related to the Gulf War syndrome. Is that in fact the case, and is the Pentagon investigating who might have been responsible for that and whether there was any damage to national security?
Well, it is true, in fact, that a large block of documents were declassified back in the fall, and that in retrospect some of them may have been improperly declassified. Those documents, the block of documents, I believe there were 1,400 in all pertaining to the Gulf War illness, have been removed temporarily from the internet. They are being reappraised, and they will be put back on the internet as soon as possible. We are investigating, one, how this happened, and we're investigating, obviously studying what the impact of this was.
Was that the result of a decision made at DoD that these were released? Was this a DoD project?
It was an intelligence community effort to declassify the documents. I don't know exactly who was responsible for the declassification.
Do you know if they were defense intelligence documents as opposed to some other agency?
I don't know the answer to that question. I will try to find out, but my suspicion is that they were intelligence community documents. These were documents that were collected during the Gulf War, and they had been the property of the intelligence community generally, The decision to declassify them was not made specifically in the Pentagon. I don't know exactly the circumstances behind the decision, but you may have been here on the day we announced Gulf Link, and which was the part on the Defense Link and the Internet to make information about Gulf War illness, its treatment, and its origin, et cetera, available. That includes, one, all the documents we put out in terms of treatment and descriptions of the symptoms, et cetera. It includes scientific studies. So anybody can log on and look at the latest scientific study and decide whether they think the conclusions are based on adequately on the information provided, the data provided, and third, some intelligence documents. And I think actually, when it was demonstrated here, we showed some documents that had been collected in Iraq during the Gulf War, and there are translations of these documents put on the Gulf Link.
And last question, you said there was being reviewed within the department. Who in fact is doing that review? Who released it? Is that the MFA?
I said it was being reviewed within the intelligence
In
community.
the intelligence. So
Right.
the Pentagon is not doing that?
Well, the intelligence community is just that. It's a community of people from several agencies. We work in concert with them.
But it's made up of various agencies, including the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence.
That's true. That's true.
So DIA is not involved in this?
I didn't say that. I said people from the intelligence community.
Is DIA involved with the review?
DIA is part of the intelligence community.
And so they're
It would be,
involved.
you would anticipate that they would be involved in any intelligence community review of any fact, and they are.
Okay.
Yes, Bob?
Some House Republicans are standing in the way of this F-16 deal for Jordan. Do you have any reaction to that, and what is the status of that deal?
Well, we have presented a concept for the sale of F-16s to Jordan, and as I understand it, the details are still being worked out, and it will have to be approved by Congress. This is something that we believe is a just result of the Middle East peace process. Jordan has legitimate security needs and a legitimate desire to improve its security position. Israel agrees. In fact, under the plan, Israel would provide some maintenance and support for Jordanian F-16s. That's I think a real and significant sign of how the world has changed because of the peace agreement between Israel and Jordan. So we hope that when we have a chance to explain the security implications of this, that Congress will understand that it's an important step forward for Middle East security.
One of the complaints there is that you didn't consult at all with them on this. Is that accurate?
Well, I'm not, I can't stand up here and tell you about every congressional consultation we've had on this or any other topic, but in general, we're quite aggressive about consulting with Congress, and I don't have any reason to believe we weren't here. There are a lot of people in Congress, and a lot more staffers in Congress, and it may be that we didn't talk to everybody we're supposed to, but we certainly have no desire to hide the facts of this deal. We think it's an important sale, and as I said, an important step toward security in the Middle East.
When do you expect it'll go to the Hill formally?
I'm afraid I don't know that. We'll try to find out. I mean, it's no secret. I just don't happen to know when it'll be worked out. When we were in Amman, we presented, the Secretary presented to King Hussein the basic elements of this package, and there were some details that had to be worked out between the Jordanians and the U.S. I'm not positive all those details have been worked out yet. I don't know. They could well have been worked out. The trip to Amman was in early January, and they may have been worked out in the last 5 or 6 weeks. We'll check. Yes, Bill.
Yes, I'd be interested in any comment that you might have on Dr. Perry's speech this morning or this afternoon, specifically regarding China-Taiwan. And I'd like your comment on the assertion that Dr. Nye made last week that Taiwan could defend itself from aggression, if there were aggression, from the mainland, from the PRC, because the PRC didn't have the sophistication to pull off a successful invasion. Does the DoD believe that is the case? And finally, the Carrier Independence Battle Group is supposed to be sailing into the Taiwanese waters here either now or in the very near future. Is there any validity to that report?
On the first question, my impression of the Secretary's speech, I thought it was an absolutely brilliant speech, very well presented. The audience loved it. It was the timing was just right. I thought the emphasis was just right. I thought it was crafted well from start to finish. Write all that down. On your second point, I think what we should talk about are the reasons for peace in the Straits of Taiwan, because both China and Taiwan have said that they want a peaceful resolution of their differences in the area, and we expect that that will happen. I don't think it's profitable to talk about attack. I think what we should talk about, as Secretary Perry did, we should talk about the reasons for peaceful resolution and the reasons that everybody in the area shares for continuing 50 years of peace in Asia. That was the topic of his speech, and I'm sure the Taiwanese and the Chinese listened to it closely, just as you did.
And that little point about the independence?
I can't answer that question. Just let me say, generally, ships pass through this. U.S. ships pass frequently through the Strait of Taiwan. Aircraft carriers don't go through quite as often, and the reason is because the strait is narrow, and they have to discontinue flight operations when they're in the strait. And aircraft carriers generally don't like to do that. They like to exercise as much as they can when they're underway. So unless there are weather or other problems, they typically don't cut through the strait. Sometimes they do, depending on their schedule. It is faster to go through the strait from between 2 points, 2 sets of points sometimes, but they don't go through as often as other ships do. But I'll try to get I'll try to get an answer to that question if we know.
Ken, Secretary Perry, in his speech, gave a rather impassioned argument for the United States remaining in a posture of constructive engagement with China. Was he signaling there that the U.S. is not considering harsh sanctions for this violation of transfer of nuclear weapons material to Pakistan?
He was, I thought he spoke very clearly about the need for constructive engagement, and it wasn't intended to signal anything. He also spoke very clearly about our opposition to proliferation and our opposition to human rights abuses. He made it very clear that we do have disagreements with China and that we aren't quiet about stating those disagreements, that we will continue to state our disagreements with China when we have them.
He also said a policy of constructive engagement is not a policy at any cost, I think is the way he put it.
He did say that, yes. He also said that it wasn't a policy at any cost, and he highlighted the mutual benefits to the U.S. and China of this policy. Bill?
Yeah, there are reports out of Asia that Chinese troops are moving from inland to areas along the coast in preparation for these exercises, which are supposed to start in the next couple of days. Do you have any information about that, and is that a cause of worry in terms of in the context of the current tensions in there?
We've seen reports of troops moving and other military equipment moving. It leads us to believe that there will be a large military exercise in that area. One of the things Secretary Perry did was speak against provocative acts in the area. We're quite sure that we're positive this will only be a military exercise, and we assume that it will be carried out with good judgment and dispatch. if it is carried out.
By reports, you're not talking about press reports. You're talking about authoritative
There have been some
reports.
press reports.
Are you talking about authoritative reports? that the
I'm
United
talking
States-
about press reports. I'm talking about reports.
Well, if you're not
Reports
talking
are
about press
reports.
if you're not talking about
I said
press-
I was talking about press reports.
How about intelligence reports?
I'm talking about reports. Reports are reports.
Can you give us any guidance on the subject of Secretary Perry's speech tomorrow?
No, I haven't looked into that, but I will. Yes?
Has the DoD initiated discharge proceedings for any HIV-positive service members yet?
No, we have
How
not.
soon do you anticipate that would begin to happen?
I think we will, well, let me re-emphasize what we're doing here. We have basically a three-track policy here. The first is we would like to get this provision repealed, and we're hoping Congress will do that. There are several senators who plan to introduce legislation. Congress is not in session now, but when it comes back, we hope that they will introduce this, and we will support that legislation. Work hard for its enactment. We also believe that there will be court challenges. I'm not aware that one has been filed yet, but I believe there will be court challenges, and the President has said, or the White House has said, that we will not oppose those court challenges on the basis of the constitutionality or lack of constitutionality of the law. And the third is administrative relief. Now, obviously, if we get the law repealed, we don't have to go to the second and the third steps. If the law isn't repealed but it's thrown out, or if the application of the law is enjoined as part of a court proceeding, then we don't have to go immediately to the administrative adjustment. If the first two efforts to repeal or throw out the law fail, then we would move on to administrative relief. And as a matter of fact, the Pentagon and the Veterans Administration have begun to work on a package. But that package is not ready yet. The law was only signed on Saturday. One other point. No one has to be, under this provision of the law, no discharges are required for 6 months. I believe that puts us to August, into August, is that right? And we will, because we're opposed to this law, wait as long as possible before beginning discharge proceedings involving any HIV-positive personnel. Yes,
Another
Bill?
question on the authorization. The authorization mandates specific missile defense programs to be core programs and sets deployment dates for them. Considering that the Pentagon is reviewing its internal missile defense program, what is the status of that review, and is that going to be held up because of this new legislation?
No, the review will not be held up, and I think that it will be completed in a very timely way.
Any hint of what timely means in the near, how far in the near future?
Soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.